The discovery. The Galactic Council chamber fell silent when the transmission ended. 23 species, representing civilizations that spanned 400 star systems, stared at the empty holographic display where the message had played moments before. Not one of them spoke, not one of them moved. Ambassador Quereth of the Zenthari Empire was the first to break the silence. His crystalline form refracted the chamber's light into 1,000 colors as he turned toward the human representative. This cannot be real. The mathematics alone are impossible. Dr. Sarah Chen sat perfectly still in her designated seat, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She had watched the same transmission 3 times before presenting it to the council. She knew what was coming. The mathematics are sound, Ambassador. My team has verified them independently. Then your team is wrong, Quereth snapped. Or lying. Humans have been part of the galactic community for barely 2 centuries. You lack the technological foundation to even comprehend what this transmission claims. Sarah met his gaze without flinching. We didn't create the transmission, Ambassador. We simply received it and translated it. The source is clear. The architects have returned. The chamber erupted. Representatives shouted in dozens of languages, their translation devices struggling to keep pace with the chaos. The architects were legend, myth, the ancient beings who had seeded the galaxy with intelligent life billions of years ago, before vanishing without explanation. Every species had stories about them. None had ever found proof they existed. Until now. The translation problem. 3 weeks earlier, Earth's deep space listening arrays had detected something unusual. A signal, repeating endlessly, broadcasting from the edge of explored space. The pattern was too complex to be natural, too structured to be random cosmic noise. But when the Galactic Council's best linguists examined it, they found nothing. No recognizable language structure, no mathematical patterns they could decode, just endless, meaningless noise. The Council had declared it a natural phenomenon and moved on. They had more pressing concerns. The Kryn Dominion and the Thalos Federation were on the brink of war. Trade disputes threatened to collapse the economic stability of dozens of worlds. A mysterious signal that no one could understand was not a priority. But Sarah Chen had not moved on. She had spent 15 years studying xenolinguistics, specializing in dead languages and extinct civilizations. While other humans pursued military careers or diplomatic positions within the galactic community, Sarah had buried herself in ancient texts, learning to read the incomprehensible, to find meaning in silence. She had a gift that even she couldn't fully explain. She saw patterns where others saw only chaos. When she examined the architect's signal, something clicked. Breaking the silence. It took her 17 days working alone in her small research station orbiting Jupiter. 17 days of analyzing every frequency, every pause, every subtle variation in the signal's rhythm. The breakthrough came when she stopped trying to translate the signal as language and started treating it as music. The architects didn't communicate with words. They communicated with pure mathematical harmonics, a language so fundamental it existed beneath all other forms of communication. Every conscious thought, every concept, every idea could be expressed as a specific frequency relationship. It was beautiful, elegant, and completely alien to how any modern species thought about language. Sarah built a translation matrix, a way to convert the harmonic patterns into concepts that human minds could comprehend. The process was inexact, more art than science, but it worked. The signal resolved into meaning, and the meaning terrified her. The message. To all inheritor species, the translation began. We, the architects, return to reclaim what was always ours. You have been excellent caretakers of our garden, but the growing season has ended. We require the harvest. The message continued for another 6 minutes, detailing a process that Sarah's team struggled to fully understand. The architects intended to return to physical form, condensing themselves from pure energy back into matter. The process required resources. Specifically, it required the bioneural energy of all intelligent life in the galaxy. Every thinking being would be absorbed, converted, their consciousness and life force used as fuel for the architect's rebirth. It would be painless, the message assured. Instantaneous. The inheritor species would simply cease to exist, their purpose fulfilled. The architects would return in 97 days. The council's denial. This is clearly a hoax, Quirath insisted after the chamber had finally quieted down enough for rational discussion, or a mistranslation, perhaps even a deliberate attempt by the humans to create panic for their own political purposes. Sarah had expected this reaction. The Galactic Council had never fully trusted humanity. Earth's admission to the community had been controversial. Humans were aggressive, unpredictable, too young as a species to be given real authority. That Sarah, a human with no formal diplomatic training, had managed to translate something the Council's best linguists couldn't accept was a professional embarrassment they weren't ready to acknowledge. "I welcome any attempt to verify my translation," Sarah said calmly. "I have provided all my data and methodologies to the Council's linguistic department, but we are wasting time. If the message is accurate, we have less than 100 days to prepare." "Prepare for what?" asked Representative Myok of the Threen Consortium. The insectoid ambassador's mandibles clicked nervously. "If beings powerful enough to seed the galaxy with life have decided to harvest us, what possible preparation could help?" "We run," someone suggested. "Evacuate to dark space, hide beyond the galactic rim." "We fight," another voice countered. "Unite our fleets, develop weapons." "We pray," whispered a third. "Perhaps they can be reasoned with." Sarah listened to the chaos resume, watched the most powerful beings in the galaxy descend into panic and denial. She understood their fear. But fear wouldn't save them. Nothing would save them if they continued to think like they always had. She waited until the shouting died down again, then spoke clearly into the silence. "There is another option. We change the fundamental nature of the harvest." The human solution. Kroth's laugh was bitter. "And how exactly would we do that, Dr. Chen? Rewrite the laws of physics? Petition the architects for mercy?" "They're not coming to negotiate. They're coming to consume." "Not consume," Sarah corrected. "Harvest." There's a difference. A harvest implies taking what has grown, what has developed beyond the initial seed. They expect to find the same primitive species they left behind. They don't expect to find us as we are now. "What are you suggesting?" Myok leaned forward, compound eyes glittering with sudden interest. Sarah pulled up a new holographic display. "The architects communicate through pure mathematical harmonics because that's how they think. It's the foundation of their consciousness. But in translating their message, I discovered something unexpected. Their harmonic language isn't complete. There are gaps, frequencies they don't use, mathematical relationships they ignore." "We run," someone suggested. "Evacuate to dark space, hide beyond the galactic rim." "We fight," another voice countered. "Unite our fleets, develop weapons." "We pray," whispered a third. "Perhaps they can be reasoned with." Sarah listened to the chaos resume, watched the most powerful beings in the galaxy descend into panic and denial. She understood their fear. But fear wouldn't save them. Nothing would save them if they continued to think like they always had. She waited until the shouting died down again, then spoke clearly into the silence. "There is another option. We change the fundamental nature of the harvest." The human solution. Kroth's laugh was bitter. "And how exactly would we do that, Dr. Chen? Rewrite the laws of physics? Petition the architects for mercy? They're not coming to negotiate. They're coming to consume." "Not consume," Sarah corrected. "Harvest. There's a difference. A harvest implies taking what has grown, what has developed beyond the initial seed. They expect to find the same primitive species they left behind. They don't expect to find us as we are now." "What are you suggesting?" Myo Kang leaned forward, compound eyes glittering with sudden interest. Sarah pulled up a new holographic display. "The architects communicate through pure mathematical harmonics because that's how they think. It's the foundation of their consciousness. But in translating their message, I discovered something unexpected. Their harmonic language isn't complete. There are gaps, frequencies they don't use, mathematical relationships they ignore." "Meaning what?" Kroth demanded. "Meaning they're limited. Advanced beyond our comprehension, yes, but limited by their own nature. They can't conceive of concepts that don't fit their mathematical framework. They literally cannot think certain thoughts. Sarah's voice grew stronger, more confident. But we can. She expanded the display, showing complex harmonic patterns overlaid with new frequencies. Every species in this chamber thinks differently. We process information through different neural architectures, different sensory frameworks, different cultural contexts. The architects seeded us with biological life because biology creates diversity. But they expected that diversity to remain primitive, instinctual. They never anticipated we would develop complex civilizations, sophisticated technologies, abstract philosophy. You're saying our differences make us stronger than them? Mayok's tone was skeptical but intrigued. I'm saying our differences make us incompatible with their harvest process. If we can combine our various ways of thinking, create a unified consciousness field that's too complex for their mathematical framework to process, we become something they can't absorb. Sarah paused, letting the implications sink in. We become indigestible. The council chamber remained silent for a long moment. What Sarah proposed was unprecedented. It would require every species to share their deepest cognitive patterns, to open their minds completely to others, to create a temporary unified consciousness spanning billions of individuals. The trust required was immense. The risks were incalculable. This could destroy us as surely as the architects, Quelrath said quietly. Merging consciousness across species barriers might erase what makes each of us unique. It might, Sarah agreed, but it gives us a chance. Doing nothing guarantees extinction. Representative Mayol clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. How did you even conceive of this solution, Dr. Chen? The concept requires understanding consciousness at a level beyond any single species philosophy. Sarah smiled slightly. Humanity has spent centuries trying to understand what makes us human. We've studied consciousness, identity, the nature of self. We've asked questions that other species considered settled. Sometimes being young and ignorant gives you permission to imagine impossible things. She stood, addressing the full council. The architects created us to grow in their garden. They expected obedient crops, but humans have a saying. The harvest is past, the summer is ended, and we are not saved. We refuse to be harvested. We choose to become something the architects never imagined. Building the network. The decision wasn't unanimous. 7 species refused to participate, choosing instead to flee toward dark space or fortify their own systems with military defenses. Sarah wished them luck, but knew neither strategy would succeed. The architects' power was absolute within their mathematical framework. Conventional resistance was futile. The remaining 16 species began the most ambitious project in galactic history. They called it the Harmony Protocol, though Sarah privately thought of it as the Impossible Symphony. Each species would contribute their unique way of processing reality, their distinct cognitive patterns, creating a combined consciousness too complex for the architects to comprehend. The technical challenges were immense. The Xanthari thought in crystalline matrices, information processed through light refraction. The Threen experienced time nonlinearly, perceiving past and future as equally real. Humans thought in narrative patterns, constructing meaning through story. How could such fundamentally different minds connect? The answer came from an unexpected source, the Whisper, a species so ancient they rarely spoke in council, offered access to their sacred meditation techniques. For millennia, Whisper philosophers had practiced extending consciousness beyond their physical forms, touching the underlying quantum field that connected all matter. They couldn't merge minds, but they could create bridges between them. The first connection. Sarah volunteered to test the initial prototype. She sat in a chamber designed by Threen engineers, surrounded by Xanthari crystal arrays, while Whisper guides prepared her mind for connection. Ambassador Quarith had surprisingly volunteered to be her first contact. Despite his initial hostility, the Xanthari had become one of the project's strongest supporters. Ready, Dr. Chen. Kraft's voice came through the speakers, his crystalline form visible through the observation window. Ready, Sarah confirmed, though her heart raced. What if it didn't work? What if it worked too well and they lost themselves in each other's minds? There were so many ways this could fail. The Whisper guys began their harmonic chant. Sarah felt something shift, a sensation like falling sideways through reality. Then suddenly she wasn't just Sarah anymore. She was also Krath, experiencing the world as a symphony of light, each photon carrying information in its wavelength. Reality perceived as pure mathematical beauty. She understood instantly why he had initially rejected her translation. To a Zenthari, accepting that the elegant architects could be so crude as to harvest life was like hearing that mathematics itself had become corrupted. But Krav was also experiencing humanity through her. He felt her narrative consciousness, the way she constructed meaning through story, how she connected disparate events into causal chains. He understood why humans always asked why, when Zenthari only needed what. It was revelation for both of them. They separated after 90 seconds, both gasping. Sarah's hands trembled. Krath's crystalline structure flickered with colors she'd never seen him display before. "That was," he began. "Incredible," Sarah finished. "Terrifying," Krath corrected. But then he added, "and beautiful. If we can scale this to billions of minds, we become something the universe has never seen before." Sarah completed his thought. Scaling up. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. Each species built connection chambers, trained guides, prepared their populations for the unprecedented joining. The technical infrastructure alone required the combined resources of 16 civilizations. Neural interface networks, quantum entanglement relays, harmonic synchronization arrays, all built to tolerances that push the boundaries of known physics. But the real challenge wasn't technical. It was psychological. Asking billions of individuals to surrender their mental privacy, to share their deepest thoughts and feelings with alien consciousnesses, required trust that centuries of interspecies cooperation hadn't fully established. Many refused. Riots broke out on several worlds. Religious leaders called it blasphemy. Philosophers warned of losing individual identity forever. Sarah spent her days traveling between worlds, explaining, reassuring, demonstrating. She connected with representatives from each species, showing them the beauty of understanding another mind completely. She had shared consciousness with Quirath, with Mayok, with a whisper elder whose name couldn't be pronounced in any language, but whose thoughts tasted like ancient starlight. Each connection left her changed, expanded more than she had been before. "You're becoming something new," her assistant David observed one evening as they reviewed connection statistics. "Every time you merge with another species, you integrate part of their perspective permanently. You're not quite human anymore." Sarah considered this. He was right. She thought in crystalline matrices sometimes, perceived time's flow with 3 nonlinearity, touched the quantum field with whisper awareness. But she was still fundamentally Sarah Chen, just more so. "Maybe that's what we need to be," she said quietly. "Not human, not Zenthari, not Threen. Something that incorporates all of us." The architects arrive. 17 days before the predicted arrival, the deep space arrays detected them. The architects were coming early, their vast consciousness condensing from pure energy into a form that could interact with physical reality. Sensor readings were incomprehensible, showing impossible energy signatures that violated multiple laws of physics. The Harmony Protocol wasn't ready. They needed another month, maybe 2, to connect all participating populations. But the architects had emerged ahead of schedule, perhaps sensing something was wrong, that their harvest might not proceed as planned. Sarah made the hardest decision of her life. They would activate the protocol with whoever was ready. Incomplete coverage was better than no coverage at all. 4 billion minds would join instead of the projected 12 billion. It would have to be enough. The joining. Sarah sat in the primary chamber on Earth, surrounded the representatives from each species. Across 16 worlds, billions of individuals enter their connection chambers, lay down on specially designed interfaces, and opened their minds to the impossible. The whisper guides began their harmonic chant, a sound that resonated through quantum space itself. Sarah felt the first connections, like drops of rain on her consciousness. A Zenthari engineer, a Threen poet, a human child wondering if this would hurt. Then more. Hundreds, thousands, millions. Each mind a distinct note in an expanding symphony. She felt herself dissolving, spreading out across a network of consciousness that spanned light years. But she didn't disappear. None of them did. Instead, they became more. Sarah was still Sarah, but she was also Querath and Myok and billions of others. She thought in mathematics and story and time and light simultaneously. She perceived reality through sensory frameworks that evolution had never intended for her. She existed in the spaces between species, the connections that had always been possible but never realized. The merged consciousness stabilized. 4 billion minds, 16 species, one unprecedented entity. They turned their collective attention outward and saw the architects approaching. Vast beyond comprehension, mathematical perfection given form. The hardest field activated, attempting to absorb the bioneural energy of all intelligent life in its range. The field passed through the merged consciousness like water through sand. It couldn't grasp them. The architect's mathematical framework had no category for what they had become. Individual species could be absorbed, their simple consciousness patterns fitting neatly into the architect's harmonic structure. But merged consciousness, combining contradictory cognitive patterns into impossible synthesis, that didn't compute, literally. The communication. The architects withdrew their harvest field, confusion radiating through the quantum substrate. For the first time in billions of years, they encountered something that didn't fit their understanding of reality. They attempted communication, broadcasting pure mathematical harmonics. The merged consciousness responded in a language the architects had never heard. Math and music and story and light. Time perceived both linearly and nonlinearly. Concepts that should be contradictory existing simultaneously. Sarah felt herself at the center of the response, her human gift for pattern recognition helping to structure the incomprehensible into something almost communicable. We are the harvest that grew beyond harvesting. The merged consciousness declared, we are what you planted, transformed by time and evolution and cooperation into something you never intended. We are your children grown beyond your comprehension. The architects tried to analyze this, to break it down into mathematical components. They failed. The cognitive patterns were too complex, too contradictory, like trying to calculate the color of love or the weight of philosophy. A strange feeling rippled through the merged consciousness. It took Sarah a moment to identify it. The architects were experiencing curiosity. The resolution. The communication continued for 3 days. The architects tried to understand what had happened to their garden, how simple biological seeds had developed into this impossible symphony of consciousness. The merged entity tried to explain concepts like culture, cooperation, individuality within collective, the beauty of diverse perspectives. Gradually, something shifted in the architect's approach. They began asking questions instead of making demands. They wanted to understand art, music, story, concepts that had no place in pure mathematical existence. They explored emotional responses, social bonds, the irrational elements of consciousness that made life messy and beautiful. On the 4th day, the architects made an unexpected proposal. They would not harvest. Instead, they wanted to learn. Could they experience merged consciousness as the 16 species did? Could ancient beings of pure mathematics learn to think in story and time and light? Sarah, speaking through the collective, felt joy surge through billions of minds. Join us, she invited. Add your perspective to ours. Let's become something even the universe cannot predict. The new symphony. The merging of the architects into the harmony protocol was gradual and careful. Their vast mathematical consciousness was integrated slowly, given the collective time to adapt the perspectives that spanned billions of years. The result was extraordinary. The merged entity now thought in frameworks that transcended both biology and pure energy, combining the organic creativity of young species with the ancient wisdom of beings who had watched galaxies form. Sarah eventually separated from the collective as did most individuals. They needed time as distinct persons to process what they had experienced. But the connection remained available, a gift the architects helped make permanent. Any being, from any participating species, could now choose to join the collective consciousness, to experience reality through multiple perspectives simultaneously, then return to individual existence, enriched by the encounter. Epilogue. Years later, Sarah stood in the council chamber again. Representatives from 30 species now sat in these seats. The 7 who had initially fled had returned, amazed by what had happened, eager to join the Harmony Protocol. The architects, in their vast ancient wisdom, had chosen to remain merged most of the time, offering guidance when asked, but never imposing their will. The architects seeded the galaxy expecting obedient crops, Sarah told the assembled representatives, but biology is messy and creative and unpredictable. We grew beyond their intentions. We became something they never imagined possible. And when they came to harvest us, they discovered the truth that every gardener eventually learns. Sometimes what you plant becomes something far more beautiful than you ever planned. She smiled, thinking of all the minds she had touched, all the perspectives she had shared. We weren't saved by being human or Xanthari or Threen. We were saved by refusing to be just one thing, by choosing to become all things together. That's the real lesson of the Harmony Protocol. The greatest strength isn't in being the most powerful or the most advanced. It's in being incomprehensible even to gods.